The courtroom was as still as death. Not a murmur, not a single rustle of paper, just a heavy, suffocating silence that made each breath feel like an unbearable weight. And then, bang, the judge's gavel slammed down like a hammer of fate. Guilty. One word. One word was all it took to destroy a man's life. Officer Michael Carter sat at the defendant's table, his once proud uniform gone, replaced by the orange jumpsuit of a convict. His wrists shackled, his future obliterated. He had given 15 years of his life to this department. 15 years of loyalty. And this was his reward. The betrayal tasted like blood in his mouth. But Michael didn't flinch. He didn't cry, didn't scream. He just sat there, his gaze fixed on the only soul in the world who still believed in him. Luke, his canine partner, his best friend, his brother. Across the room, the German shepherd sat near the gallery, his ears alert, his intelligent amber eyes locked onto Michael's face. Luke didn't understand. How could he? One moment they were partners, a team, unstoppable. And now his master, his protector, his entire world was being taken away. Michael had been one of the best. 15 years on the force, countless lives saved, a spotless record of honor and integrity. And Luke had been there through it all. Drug busts, armed standoffs, missing person rescues. There were times when a split second meant the difference between life and death. And Luke was always there. There was the night they had tracked a kidnapper deep into the woods. The child had been locked in a shed, barely breathing. It was Luke who found him. It was Luke who stood guard, growling, teeth bared, when the kidnapper had lunged at Michael with a knife. Luke had saved his life again and again. And in return, Michael had promised him one thing: I will never leave you. But now, that promise was being shattered. Because the department, the very people he had bled for, had turned against him. They had framed him, set him up as a scapegoat for a crime he didn't commit. And now they were sending him to prison for something he never did. But the worst part? It wasn't the years he'd lose behind bars. It wasn't the disgrace attached to his name. It was the one loss he couldn't bear. Luke. They were taking Luke away from him, forever. The judge was already standing, preparing to leave. The guards moved forward, ready to take Michael away in chains, and that's when Michael broke. His voice, hoarse with pain, cut through the silence like a knife. Your Honor, please. The judge paused. Michael swallowed back the emotion clogging his throat. Before I'm taken away, I have one last request. The entire courtroom fell into stunned silence. Even the prosecutor, the snake responsible for this nightmare, looked confused. Michael took a shaky breath. Let me say goodbye to my dog. There was a collective gasp from the crowd. The judge studied Michael for what felt like an eternity. Finally, after what seemed like a lifetime, he spoke. His voice was firm, but not unkind. 3 minutes. The moment Luke was released from his handler's grip, the dog sprinted across the courtroom. His claws clicked against the tile floor, his breathing heavy with urgency. Michael dropped to his knees, arms open wide, just as Luke collided into him with full force. Michael buried his face into the thick fur of Luke's neck, clutching him like a lifeline in a storm. I'm sorry, buddy, he whispered, his voice cracking. I let you down. Luke whimpered, pressing closer, his body trembling. Michael pulled back just enough to look into his partner's soulful amber eyes. I won't be there anymore, he choked out. Luke's ears flattened, and then something changed. Luke's body tensed, his nose twitched furiously, and suddenly he lunged for Michael's jumpsuit. Luke's barking echoed through the courtroom, sharp and relentless. His claws scraped against the floor as he yanked at Michael's prison jumpsuit, his teeth gripping the fabric with urgency. The crowd murmured in confusion. What's wrong with the dog? Someone whispered. The judge's brows furrowed. Control your K9, Officer Carter. But Michael wasn't controlling anything. He had seen this before. Luke wasn't just barking. He was alerting. Every handler knew the difference between a dog's bark for attention and a bark for danger. Luke had never been wrong. Not once. Not when he sniffed out explosives in a crowded subway. Not when he alerted Michael to a gunman hiding in the shadows. Not when he found the missing girl buried under debris after an earthquake. And now? Now he was barking at Michael. Michael's pulse pounded in his ears. He grabbed Luke's harness, trying to steady him. What is it, boy? He whispered. What are you trying to tell me? But Luke wouldn't stop. He pulled harder, his sharp nose pressing against Michael's chest, sniffing wildly. And then he bit down, not on Michael, but on something hidden beneath his jumpsuit. The clue that changed everything. There was a small metallic click. Something fell to the ground. A tiny silver device, barely noticeable. But the moment it hit the cold marble floor, the entire courtroom froze. An officer stepped forward, frowning as he bent down to pick it up. He turned it over in his palm. And then his eyes widened. It was a recording device. A murmur swept through the courtroom like wildfire. The judge's voice was sharp. "Play it." The officer fumbled with the tiny device, his fingers trembling as he hit play. And then the voices rang out, clear as day, a cold, calculated exchange. "Just plant the evidence. Carter's the perfect scapegoat. No one's going to question it." The words slammed into Michael's chest like a gunshot. The crowd gasped. The jury's expressions twisted. The very people who had just condemned him. Michael's breath hitched. He knew that voice. His hands clenched into tight fists. It was Captain Ray Harding, his own superior, his mentor, the man who had guided him for years, the man who had set him up. The prosecutor, the very same man who had worked so hard to convict Michael, went pale. He shot forward, desperation etched into his face. This doesn't prove anything," he barked, trying to snatch the device from the officer's hand. But the judge's gavel slammed down. "Sit down." The force of his voice shook the room. The prosecutor froze, his lips parting, but no words came out. The truth was out. The trial wasn't over. It had just begun. The courtroom exploded into chaos. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Whispers turned into shouts. Michael barely registered the noise. His ears were ringing. His heart pounded like a war drum. The betrayal sank in like a knife. His own captain, the man who had trained him, guided him, stood beside him in life and death situations. And now, he had set Michael up to take the fall. Luke's body remained tense, his ears pinned back, his eyes locked onto the prosecutor. The man was sweating. His hands trembled as he tried to grab the recorder from the officer's hands. The judge's gavel slammed down again. "Enough." The prosecutor flinched. The crowd fell into silence. The judge turned to the officer still holding the tiny device. His voice was stone cold. "Play it again." A moment of static. Then the voices rang out once more, crystal clear. "Carter's the perfect scapegoat. No one will question it. Make sure the evidence sticks. We need him gone." The final sentence sent a shiver through the room. "If he finds out the truth, we'll handle it." Michael felt his stomach drop. They hadn't just framed him. They were planning to kill him. A sharp movement in the crowd. Michael's eyes snapped to the side. Captain Harding was already standing. His face was stone cold, expressionless. But Michael saw it, the slight twitch in his jaw, the barely visible clench of his fist, the flicker of realization. He was caught, but he wasn't going to go down without a fight. Harding's hands moved fast. 1 second, he was still. The next, he lunged toward the officer holding the recorder. Luke reacted instantly. A deep, feral growl tore from his chest. Michael barely had time to process what was happening before Luke launched forward. Harding's hand had almost reached the officer's gun. Almost. But Luke got there first. His teeth clamped down on Harding's forearm. The man screamed. The entire courtroom erupted into chaos once more. Michael's instincts take over. Years of training kicked in. Michael shot to his feet. His hands moved automatically, locking Harding's other arm behind his back in a crushing hold. Harding thrashed. "You don't understand," he yelled. "This goes bigger than me. You're ruining everything." Michael's blood boiled. "Bigger than you?" he snarled. "You threw me away like I was nothing." Harding whipped his head around. His voice dropped. Low, quiet, dangerous. "You don't even know what you just uncovered." Michael's grip tightened, his gut twisted. Because deep down he knew, Harding wasn't lying. This wasn't just about him. It was something much, much bigger. The moment of reckoning. The courtroom erupted in chaos, but Michael could hear nothing except the sound of his own breathing. Luke's low growl was still reverberating in his chest as he held Captain Harding pinned to the ground. The judge's gavel pounded against the bench, trying to restore order. But the truth was already out. This wasn't just a wrongful conviction. This was a conspiracy. And Harding wasn't the only one involved. Michael yanked Harding to his feet, keeping a firm grip on the man's wrist. The captain twisted slightly, turning just enough to lock eyes with Michael. His voice was low, just for him. "You should have just taken the fall, Carter." Michael felt his stomach twist. Harding's lips curled into a slow, bitter smile. You don't get it yet, do you? Michael's jaw clenched. Enlighten me, Harding chuckled, shaking his head. You think I framed you alone? The word sent a chill down Michael's spine. Harding's gaze flickered across the room. Michael followed it, and his blood turned to ice. Because sitting in the gallery, among the dozens of shocked spectators, were two men in suits, unmoving, expressionless, watching. They didn't look like reporters, or family members, or anyone who should have been in that courtroom. And yet, their presence sent alarm bells through Michael's brain. He recognized the type: government, private sector, intelligence, or worse. Dirty cops from even higher up. Luke felt it too. The canine's ears flattened, his stance shifting between alertness and aggression. His deep snarl rumbled in warning. But the two men didn't flinch. They just watched. And then, one of them gave the slightest nod. Not to Michael, not to Luke, as if they were sending a message. Michael's grip tightened on Harding's wrist. Who are they? Harding's smirk deepened. You're in over your head, officer. Michael's heartbeat pounded in his ears, because for the first time, he knew Harding was right. The judge stood abruptly, his face dark with fury. Bailiffs, remove Captain Harding from my courtroom. Place him in custody immediately. Harding didn't resist. His eyes never left Michael. Even as the officers dragged him away, his voice carried across the silent room. You think you're free, Carter? You have no idea what's coming. Michael stood frozen, Luke at his side. His hands trembled at his sides. Because he wasn't sure what scared him more, Harding's words, or the men in suits who had just slipped out the courtroom door, disappearing into the city like they'd never been there at all. But Michael knew better. They were watching, waiting. And whatever Harding had been a part of, it was far from over. A dangerous freedom. Michael stepped out of the courthouse, his first breath of fresh air as a free man, tainted by the weight of what had just happened. The world outside felt too loud, too normal for the chaos still swirling inside him. Luke trotted beside him, his canine instincts sharper than ever, his head swiveling as if expecting another attack. Michael knew better than to think this was over. Harding was locked up. The case was reopened. But whoever had orchestrated this conspiracy wasn't done. Michael could feel it, like a loaded gun pressed against the back of his skull, and he had no intention of waiting for them to pull the trigger. Luke suddenly stopped dead in his tracks, his ears pinned back, his body tensed. Then, a snarl rumbled in his throat. Michael followed his line of sight. A black SUV sat idling at the curb. Tinted windows. No plates, watching, waiting. And the second Luke's warning growl cut through the air, the SUV peeled off, tires screeching against pavement, gone in an instant. But not before Michael caught a glimpse of the driver. One of the men from the courtroom. Michael exhaled shakily, his mind racing. Luke had smelled it before Michael saw it. They weren't just being followed, they were being hunted. Michael's fingers curled into fists. They had taken his badge, his freedom, his dignity, and now they were circling. Like vultures waiting to see if he'd die before he could expose them all. Not today. He wasn't running, and he sure as hell wasn't going down without a fight. Michael reached for his phone. He had one person he could trust right now. Officer Sarah Mitchell. A detective who had believed in his innocence from the beginning. A friend. She picked up on the second ring. Michael? Her voice was cautious. Please tell me you're not about to do something reckless. Michael's jaw tightened. That depends. How fast can you get to my place? Sarah exhaled. What's going on? They're still watching me. A pause. Then, I'll be there in 10. As Michael hung up, a chill crawled down his spine. Because he had just realized something. They weren't just watching him. They were watching everyone involved in exposing them. And that meant Sarah wasn't just backup. She was a target too. Michael paced the length of his small apartment, his fists clenching and unclenching as his mind raced through the possibilities. Luke sat near the door, his ears twitching at every noise from outside, his sharp gaze locked on the window. They were being hunted. And Sarah. She didn't know she was walking straight into a trap. Michael's gut twisted. If they had been watching him, they were watching her too. And if she was coming here, they knew. They were waiting. Michael barely had time to react before 3 sharp knocks echoed through the apartment. Luke's body snapped to attention. His low growl rumbled deep in his chest. Michael didn't move. His hand hovered over his gun. Was it Sarah, or was it them? A fourth knock. Then, "It's me." Sarah's voice. But Michael wasn't stupid. He moved to the window instead, peering out at the street below. A car sat parked across the road, the same black SUV from before. His heart slammed against his ribs. They were watching, waiting, and he had just confirmed what he already knew. Michael cracked the door open just an inch, enough to see Sarah's face. Her expression was sharp, focused, and behind her, the street was too quiet, too still. Sarah noticed it too. She didn't step inside. Instead, she held up her phone. A single text displayed on the screen. It was from an unknown number. "You should have stayed out of it." Michael gritted his teeth. Sarah's voice was calm, but her eyes were burning. "They know I'm here." Michael's pulse pounded in his ears. They could run, disappear, but that would mean they'd already lost. Michael wasn't running, not this time. He looked down at Luke. His canine partner was already waiting, his sharp eyes trained on the street. Michael had made his choice. Michael grabbed his jacket. "We're not waiting for them to make a move." Sarah's eyebrows lifted. "What are you saying?" Michael's jaw clenched. "We're taking the fight to them." Luke barked once, as if he understood exactly what was coming. Michael exhaled sharply. "Let's go hunting." The street was quiet. Too quiet. Michael and Sarah slipped out the back door of the apartment complex, their movements swift and calculated. Luke stayed close to Michael's side, his ears perked, nose twitching. He smelled something wrong. Michael's eyes flickered to Sarah. She gave a short nod. They didn't have much time. The SUV across the street wasn't just watching them, it was waiting for something. They moved fast. Michael led them through a narrow alleyway, avoiding the main streets. Every step was measured, every breath controlled. Then, Luke froze. His entire body stiffened. Sarah saw it too. Someone was waiting ahead. Michael's grip on his weapon tightened. They weren't alone. A figure stepped into the alley. A man, tall, dressed in black, gun in hand. His voice was smooth, too smooth. "You should have left it alone, Carter." Michael's blood ran cold. Sarah reached for her weapon, but another voice from behind. "Don't." Michael clenched his jaw. They were surrounded. Luke's low growl sent chills through the alley. The man in front of them smirked. "Cute dog." Michael didn't hesitate. "He's not cute. He's your worst nightmare." Before the man could react, Luke lunged, fangs bared, a vicious snarl tearing through the night. The man barely had time to raise his weapon before Luke had him pinned. His gun clattered to the ground. Michael moved fast, turning, gun raised. Sarah took the one behind them. 2 shots fired, silenced, clean. Then, silence. Sarah exhaled sharply. Michael looked down at Luke. His canine partner was still on high alert. The dog had saved their lives. Again, Michael knelt beside the man. He wasn't dead. Not yet. "Who sent you?" The man chuckled weakly. His lips were bloody, but his eyes held no fear. "You think this ends with me?" Michael's stomach dropped. Luke growled. Sarah clenched her jaw. "We need to go, now." Michael's mind raced. This wasn't a random hit. This was a message, and whoever sent it was just getting started. They ran, Luke leading the way. Michael's pulse pounded. Sarah's breathing was steady. They needed a new plan, fast, because one thing was clear. This wasn't just about covering up corruption anymore. It was about eliminating them. For good. The street was quiet. Too quiet. Michael and Sarah slipped out the back door of the apartment complex, their movements swift and calculated. Luke stayed close to Michael's side, his ears perked, nose twitching. He smelled something wrong. Michael's eyes flickered to Sarah. She gave a short nod. They didn't have much time. The SUV across the street wasn't just watching them, it was waiting for something. They moved fast. Michael led them through a narrow alleyway, avoiding the main streets. Every step was measured, every breath controlled. Then, Luke froze. His entire body stiffened. Sarah saw it too. Someone was waiting ahead. Michael's grip on his weapon tightened. They weren't alone. A figure stepped into the alley. A man, tall, dressed in black, gun in hand. His voice was smooth, too smooth. "You should have left it alone, Carter." Michael's blood ran cold. Sarah reached for her weapon, but another voice from behind. "Don't." Michael clenched his jaw. They were surrounded. Luke's low growl sent chills through the alley. The man in front of them smirked. "Cute dog." Michael didn't hesitate. "He's not cute. He's your worst nightmare." Before the man could react, Luke lunged, fangs bared, a vicious snarl tearing through the night. The man barely had time to raise his weapon before Luke had him pinned. His gun clattered to the ground. Michael moved fast, turning, gun raised. Sarah took the one behind them. 2 shots fired, silenced, clean. Then, silence. Sarah exhaled sharply. Michael looked down at Luke. His canine partner was still on high alert. The dog had saved their lives. Again, Michael knelt beside the man. He wasn't dead. Not yet. "Who sent you?" The man chuckled weakly. His lips were bloody, but his eyes held no fear. "You think this ends with me?" Michael's stomach dropped. Luke growled. Sarah clenched her jaw. "We need to go, now." Michael's mind raced. This wasn't a random hit. This was a message, and whoever sent it was just getting started. They ran, Luke leading the way. Michael's pulse pounded. Sarah's breathing was steady. They needed a new plan, fast, because one thing was clear: this wasn't just about covering up corruption anymore. It was about eliminating them. For good.
Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please support me by clicking the logo in the bottom right corner to subscribe to my channel. This way you won't miss any of the exciting stories coming up. Thank you so much.